Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first virtual Understanding Health talk for University Hospitals Dorset. My name's James Donald. I'm Head of Communications at University Hospitals Dorset, and it's my great pleasure to be here to welcome you, not just the first virtual event that we've been running like this, but also the first event for University Hospitals Dorset. So very exciting afternoon. Thank you all for joining us on this rather sunny day. We're using new technology, or new to us, so please do bear with us as we go through this afternoon. We do have an opportunity for you to ask questions online, so if you've got any questions for Professor Middleton, please do post them online. There's a little Q&A panel on the side of the screen that you should be able to post questions to Professor Middleton, and we'll answer these at the end if we have an opportunity, which would be brilliant. Please don't post any personal questions. It's sort of general themes that we're interested in that Professor Middleton can help with. He won't be able to answer any specific personal problems or questions that you have today. So please do keep it general. Thank you for that. It's also an opportunity for me to quickly talk about our trust. We're a new trust. We've got a lot of members of our trust, so I will be posting a link if you're interested in finding out more about the trust and more about the work that we're doing as we transform ourselves. We'll post a link to becoming a member of the trust, and also to learn more about our governors. Our governors are a fantastic asset for the trust, so we'll post some links that you can see about that. But that's enough from me. Now it's a great pleasure for me to introduce Professor Rob Middleton, a brilliant first speaker for us, because not only does he work for University Hospitals Dorset, but he also works at Bournemouth University. And as many of you will know, we became a University Hospital Trust when we merged. So a brilliant first speaker. So over to you, Professor Middleton. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James, and thank you for everyone who's taken the time to attend this evening. It's a beautiful sunny evening, and to drag yourselves away from the beach and the parks to come is a great honour. So I'm going to keep it short and sharp and relevant today. And so I'm going to talk about a number of things. One, I'm going to mention about waiting times. I'm going to talk about if your health has changed since you were put on the waiting list, things that you can do to make yourself fit and ready for surgery, and then finally talk about the alternatives to surgery. So I think the big question many of you may be asking is, what are the waiting times like? And the true answer is, I don't, and I don't think anyone really knows the answer to that. And the reason is that there are too many variables to really know. So if we just mention two of them, lockdown and new variants. Firstly, we heard from Boris Johnson last night that lockdown, we hope, and restrictions will end in a month's time, but we don't know for certain. And you can imagine the effect that that has on our clinics, our theatres, and on general running of the hospital. If you go to any shop in the high street, you can see queues outside, slow progress through that. So coming out of lockdown is essential for us to return to normal. We hope, like everyone else, that the new variants will remain susceptible to two vaccines. We know at present, if you have two vaccines, then you have very comprehensive cover against COVID, but it's possible that there could be other variants later this year or next year, and it only takes a relatively small number of admissions to hospitals for us really to shut down and concentrate on looking after those patients. And I think finally we have to say something for our staff. We've been very fortunate during this crisis of having brilliant staff who've worked above and beyond what is normally expected, but they've been doing that for over a year, and to ask more and more of them is difficult. Having said that, I would say overall that I'm very optimistic that waiting times can come down as fast, if not faster, than they went up. And there are lots of factors which suggest that we will get out of this crisis quickly and fully. And the things I want to mention are the new buildings, the new staff, insourcing and outsourcing, and the Nightingale clinics. So it's a pity we couldn't run this meeting face to face on the Royal Bournemouth site or the pool site, because what you would see is that around the hospital is being transformed into a building site, that the car parks are being ripped up, foundations are being put in, and new clinics are being built, new theatres are being built, new facilities are being built. So over the coming months and years, we are going to see a provincial district general hospital be transformed into a large national and international teaching hospital with the facilities to match it. So that building is going on as we speak. In terms of new staff, we continue to recruit new staff, both from abroad, but also the UK, and more in particular, we're training more and more of our new staff here in the hospital and in the university, and that gives us a secure and sustainable workforce. Now, one thing I want to explain is about insourcing and outsourcing. So if you look at our hospital and any hospital, you'll find that a lot of the time, say, the operating theatres aren't used in the evenings and weekends. And it's always been our intention in the NHS to move to 7-day weeking to make the best use of those resources. But as I mentioned earlier, in terms of staff burnout, we can't really expect our staff who've been putting in 40, 48, 52, 72-hour weeks to do even more nights and weekends. So what we're doing is outside companies are coming in, they're using our resources, the theatres at evenings and weekends, using some of our own staff that do wish to do overtime, but also bringing in staff from the rest of the country to staff those theatres and those clinics so that we can be doing 7-day clinics even when we are recovering from COVID. Now, in terms of outsourcing, we were greatly helped during lockdown by the independent or private hospitals. They were taken over by the NHS so that we could keep our cancer surgery and other work going while the hospital concentrated on looking after patients with COVID. Those hospitals now return to the private sector, but they are still helping the NHS and operations that can be done there reasonably are outsourced to local and regional private hospitals. And the final bit is the Nightingale clinics. You may remember at the start of the COVID crisis, the NHS set these clinics up around the country, and we had one at the BIC. Some were not used like the BIC, others like Exeter were, and we transferred a number of patients there when we were under pressure, which allowed us to keep going. And after that initial crisis went, these clinics were then repurposed and they've been used as vaccination hubs with great success. Now, the vaccination programme is coming to a close, and the aim of the NHS is now to repurpose those vaccination clinics as potentially mass clinics where we can offer better, safer, more time-dependent treatments available. So there'll probably be announcements over the coming months, but a lot of work and preparations are going into those. So I'd be confident as we go into the autumn and the winter that we will be able to get a lot of support from the Nightingale clinics. And as James mentioned earlier, there has been a change within the trust. So we were previously the Royal Bournemouth Hospital and Poole Hospitals, and you would have thought as they merged, they'd be called something like the Poole and Bournemouth Hospital. But we're actually called University Hospitals Dorset, and that is on purpose because there is a big change. We are changing from a regional district general hospital into a major teaching hospital. And our partnership with Bournemouth University is crucial in that. It supports the NHS in a huge number of ways, one of which is that it means that facilities of the university are available. And I don't know if any of you have been out to the main Talbot campus, but there the university has built one of the most modern and up-to-date universities in the world. You could be in California or Tokyo or Beijing. The facilities are absolutely superb. And if we remember, Bournemouth University was voted #1 new university in the UK by The Guardian a number of years ago. A good illustration of how the university has helped during COVID. In my own institute, there are research staff immediately volunteered and reallocated to help the hospital. We had machines that could do the COVID testing when there was no COVID testing available in the NHS. We moved not only those machines to the hospital, but we moved the staff, and they ran those machines at nights and weekends and during the day. So going forward, we look forward to training more staff, nurses, technicians, but also we have a proposal to start a new medical school in Bournemouth to train local doctors to treat local patients. Also during COVID, we continued to train surgeons. So as you may know, all elective surgery stopped for approximately 6 months while we concentrated on emergency surgery. And that meant that a lot of surgeons, particularly young surgeons, were getting no training at all. So we moved our virtual reality surgical trainers from the university into the hospital so we could continue training our surgeons. And you can see me here training a surgeon to do keyhole surgery, in this case taking out the tear of a cartilage in a knee. We've also now got access to the facilities of the university, and this shows a gait lab, and this can be used to diagnose problems such as a limp or weakness in the leg, and also to design new treatments. So if we now go back, if you're on the waiting list for a hip for an operation, think about, has there been a health change since you went on the waiting list? Because that may affect whether you go ahead with treatment or whether it needs to be altered. So say you're waiting for an investigation, say you've had some blood in the stool or blood in your urine and you're waiting for tests to be done, you may be the safest thing to delay an operation while those have been completed. You may have a new diagnosis, say cancer, where obviously the treatment of that cancer takes priority over what you were planning to have. A new condition may occur, say a heart attack or a stroke. You may be on new drugs, steroids, say for polymyalgia rheumatica or blood thinners, and these would materially affect whether you should go ahead with the operation. So for example, if you had a heart attack, you'd be admitted to the Royal Bournemouth Hospital, you'd have stents out and you may be out the next day, but you would be on strong blood thinners for about a year afterwards. And that means that you couldn't have surgery during that year, because if you stop those blood thinners, you could have a heart attack again. The same after a stroke. If you've had a stroke, then you'd want to avoid surgery within a year of that stroke because of the risk of having a further stroke. So if there has been a health change, you're waiting for investigation, you've got a new diagnosis, a new condition, or you're on a new drug, it's important that you flag this up with the hospital, but particularly with whoever's in charge, the administrator of the waiting list, because that may mean a delay in your treatment, or it may be that your treatment has to be altered to take that into account. So now let's think about the things that I can do to make myself fitter and prepare myself for surgery. And there are 4 things that we can all do, and they're weight, smoking, alcohol, and exercise. So losing weight, that's probably the single best thing that you can do. We know that if you lose weight, that may improve the condition that you've got. It's certainly going to make surgery a lot safer, and you're going to rehabilitate much quicker afterwards. So being overweight can increase all the risks of surgery, particularly with anaesthetics, but in terms of infection, DVT and pulmonary emboli, and wound healing. And the best way to find out whether you're a healthy weight or not is to Google NHS BMI. So if you just put NHS BMI into Google, it'll come up with an NHS site, which you click on it, you put in your age, sex, height and weight, and a few simple other details, and it will come out and tell you whether you're a healthy weight, underweight or overweight. And if you're not a healthy weight, it'll tell you how much weight you should aim to lose and how quickly you should do it. So it's a very useful tool, and any weight you can lose before the operation will make the operation safer, better, and a quicker recovery for you. Now, alcohol and smoking, as you can see from this chap here, he's probably not in a fit state to have a major operation. So in terms of alcohol, the maximum alcohol you should be drinking is an average of 14 units a week. And a unit is a small glass of wine or half a pint of beer, such as bitter. Some lagers are much stronger than that. But it's not just that it's 14 units a week. You should also have 2 days a week completely clear of alcohol. And the reason for that is that you need to clear your liver out completely so it can return to normal. If you drink a bit each day, it means every day your liver is still playing catch up, trying to metabolize that alcohol. In terms of smoking, it's the single worst thing that you can do in terms of everything. So just in your general health, every cancer, lung cancer, oropharyngeal cancer, whatever cancer you can think of is made worse by smoking, but it's also the damage that it does to your lungs, and no amount of smoking is safe. Vaping probably is a bit safer than smoking, but vaping really should only be used to help you quit smoking completely and not to become a vapor. The key thing about smoking is that you must stop 6 weeks before the operation. And the reason for that is that smoke has carbon monoxide in it, which binds to the red blood cells and prevents them carrying oxygen. And that means that if you smoke in the 6 weeks before the operation, the red blood cells carry less oxygen. And so your risk of things like a heart attack, a stroke, poor wound healing are much greater. So I would urge anyone that smokes is to stop completely, but at least stop smoking for at least 6 weeks before the operation. And the final thing is exercise. We should all be doing at least 30 minutes of low impact exercise a day, ideally twice a day. Good examples are cycling on a road bike or a static bike, swimming or aqua aerobics, Pilates, yoga, Nordic pole walking. It makes a huge difference to your general fitness and your ability to get through an operation, not only unscathed, but in good condition. And finally, you need to ask yourself, have you thought about alternatives to surgery? And the reason I say that is that we often assume that an operation is the only solution for a problem. So I'm a hip surgeon. If a patient has hip pain and they have an X-ray that shows arthritis, everyone assumes that they need a hip replacement. And in fact, nothing further could be from the truth. Most patients can be treated much more simply and effectively without surgery. And the slide you're showing is from a class that we run, a hip class that's designed to relieve hip pain and stiffness. It's called Chain Cycling Against Hip Pain. And let me tell you the story behind that, because it's a good example of alternative treatments that are available. So the story goes back to 2008 when I was asked to sit on the NICE, National Institute of Clinical Excellence panel, to look at the treatment of osteoarthritis in the NHS. And so they gathered the good and great from around the country, representing all parties that were interested in arthritis, and we reviewed all the research in the world to come up with the best solutions for patients in the UK. And I thought it was all going to be about operations. I thought it was going to be about, you know, how you perform the best hip replacement, but it wasn't. If we look at the next slide, we come on to the core treatments that NICE looked at. There we are. And what we can see is that right on the outside are the operations, but right in the centre are the core treatments. And let's have a look at those. And those 3 core treatments for arthritis are education, exercise, and weight loss. And all the research in every country in the world shows that the majority of people with arthritis, if treated with those 3 things, can control their symptoms. And it's only a relatively small number that need drug or operative treatment. And what's interesting is that's the same for all chronic diseases. So whether you've got diabetes, heart disease, stroke or cancer, education, weight loss and exercise are the key treatments. So diabetes is well known that if you lose weight and do regular exercise, you may be able to come off treatment, insulin or tablets like metformin. We know with heart disease, if you have a heart attack and stents, if you return to exercise, you're less likely to have problems in the future. And the worst thing you can do is stop exercising. And that's the same for stroke. If you have a stroke and you recover from it by doing exercise regularly, you're less likely to have a further stroke. And even in cancer, people who exercise regularly are less likely to get cancer. And if you've got cancer, if you start exercising, you're less likely to get recurrences and suffer from it. And that's true for arthritis. And it may seem odd as a supposed expert on that panel, but that really hadn't dawned on me until we wrote that report. But it brought to mind my own problems with arthritis, which I hadn't really analysed. So when I was in my late 30s, 39 to be precise, I decided I wanted to do a marathon before I was 40. And so I began to train for it and did the New Forest Marathon. And the first 17 miles were a piece of cake. I was running 7-minute miles. I thought I was going to get some incredible time for my age. And then I started to develop pain in my knee and my thigh and my groin and my buttock. And I started limping badly, and I finished the marathon, but I could only just walk. And for the couple of weeks after the marathon, I was suffering quite bad hip pain. And I was thinking, God, I've got arthritis, so I'm going to need a hip replacement. Who am I going to get to do it? At the same time, I normally ran about 3 times a week with one of my neighbours, and he had just had an operation on his knee, an arthroscopy, and started cycling. So we started cycling in the mornings instead of running. And over the weeks, my hip pain sort of disappeared and I forgot all about it. And then I remember going on holiday for a fortnight, and I didn't do any exercise on holiday. And over that fortnight, my hip started becoming stiff and painful again. And I started taking the lift rather than going up the stairs at the hotel. And then when I got home, I started cycling again and the pain went. And this happened once or twice, but I really didn't attach any relevance to it until I sat on that NICE committee and realised the importance of exercise. So that stimulated to say, what's going on here? And so I started doing some research. And what I found in the research was something very curious, that people with arthritis had wasting of the muscles in their leg. So in the example here, someone's got hip arthritis, and it's the same for knee arthritis. If you measure how big the muscles are compared to the other side, they're less. And I had always thought that you got arthritis, you did less and your muscles wasted away. But in fact, there are good research papers showing that the muscle wasting occurs before the patient gets any symptoms or signs, which is a bit odd. So how can we explain that? Well, we know muscle wasting occurs with age. As we get older, particularly as we get over 50, our muscles waste. And if we're younger than that, as we can see from the chap on the couch, if you're inactive, your muscles waste away. When your muscles waste, your joint, your hip and knee become unstable because they're not being held in. And so the bones rub against each other and damage themselves and can cause arthritis. And that's how and why cycling works. It has a number of effects, both analgesic and mechanical. So if you overstimulate the joint, you can fool the brain that it's not hurting. So if you cycle a bike for half an hour, you're doing about 1,500 joint mobilizations. And when that happens, the brain thinks, well, this can't be right. I can't be having the hip stimulated 90 times a minute. And so it down-regulates those pain receptors. It says those pain receptors must be wrong, and so ignores them. And so the pain often gets better. You also get a release of endorphins. So endorphins are like morphine produced by your own body. And that's why sportsmen and women get high after events, because they get endorphins. I once did an event called the Étape du Tour. So you have the Tour de France, and there's an amateur race that you can do on one of the rest days of the Tour de France. So it's the hardest stage in the Tour de France. It's 100 miles cycling uphill, and I did it with a couple of local friends. We drove out there, missed a night's sleep. We then did the 100-mile race and got back. And I thought that night that I would be absolutely tired and I would sleep like a log. In fact, it took me 2 or 3 days to sleep because I was so high on endorphins, I couldn't go to sleep. I had this feeling of great wellness, and that's what happens to a lesser degree with moderate exercise, and that helps you sleep. The mechanical effects, well, you strengthen the muscles, and if you remember, I said as we get older, our muscles waste. Well, the reason they waste is as you get older, you need to do more exercise to maintain your muscles. So it's perfectly possible for a 75-year-old to have as big quads and hamstrings as a 25-year-old, but he or she has to do a lot more training. So it's almost each year, as you get older each year, you've got to do a bit more exercise to maintain the muscles that you had before. So we came up with a program, Cycling Against Hip Pain. It's a 6-week course. It was supported by the community and run at the Littledown Centre. And it consisted an hour a week for 6 weeks, half an hour of education, half an hour of a spin class. And we can see the partnership. This was between the university, the hospital, Active Dorset, the clinical commissioning group, but also the local council as well, and BH Live, because all those parties felt that they should be doing something for the health and well-being of our local community. And what we found after 6 weeks is that more than 70% of people doing the course had improved pain, function and activity, which is incredible. And recently we just published the 5-year results. So of the people that referred to my clinic for a hip replacement and would have had a hip replacement if we hadn't anything else to offer them, 57% 5 years down the line had not had an operation. So it really does show that there are alternative treatments to surgery that can be as good, if not better, than the surgery itself. And as I said, the treatments in terms of weight loss, exercise and education apply to all chronic diseases. So hopefully the topics we've covered, waiting times. So although I honestly don't know what the waiting times are, there are a huge number of things that UHD is doing to make sure that those waiting times fall fast. There's a huge building program that is started and ongoing. We've got new staff. We're doing insourcing and outsourcing to do extra procedures, and we're looking to use those Nightingale clinics positively in the future to really turbocharge our recovery. We then discussed, has my health changed? If your health has changed, you've got a new diagnosis, you've got a new drug, you've had a health issue, you're having investigations, you've got cancer or so, please tell your consultant or their team what's happened to see if your treatment needs to be modified and what the priorities are. And the things that you can do before surgery: stop smoking if you smoke, get your alcohol to 14 units below a week and 2 days clear, and lose some weight and do some exercise. And that may well improve your symptoms and you could avoid surgery. But if you still require surgery, you're going to be so much fitter and happier and recover quickly. And think about, have you been offered alternatives to surgery? You can do your own research. You can ask us and say, actually, are there any alternatives to this? And I can tell you at UHD, we're looking actively at the moment as we come out of lockdown to offer new courses and treatments that can achieve similar goals without people having to come in for operations. And finally, looking forward, I want to build on what James said about how important the new name University Hospitals Dorset and the new partnership with Bournemouth University is, because in the future we want to be as good as the best hospitals in this country and abroad. So if we look at Oxford and what it's contributed during COVID, we know the AstraZeneca vaccine, which we name the Oxford vaccine, that was developed at Oxford, and that's helped transform things for people in this country and abroad. And what we'd like to see in the decades ahead, that Bournemouth could do its bit as well to to bring new technology. So let's just think of a possible example. In the institute at the university that I run, we do a lot of work on robots, and we believe that the future is these nanorobots. So I've got a professor of medical engineering, Professor Ian Swain, working with me, a number of PhD students, and we're looking to develop nanorobots. So these are robots the size of a pencil dot. And the idea is in the future, instead of having an operation, you would just come to outpatients and we would inject one of these nanorobots into your hip joint. And then I would control that nanorobot to reshape, remove, repair and inject your joint to get rid of the pain and stiffness without you requiring surgery. So that's the future potential of the link up with Bournemouth University, and why everyone here at UHD is so excited about the future. Not only did the university help the trust during the COVID pandemic with testing and other things, but it's helping it get out there, train the workforce for the future, but also to work with the brilliant clinicians at the hospital to develop new treatments for the future. So I would like to say thank you very much for listening to me, and I'll hand back to James, and I'm happy to take any questions that you've submitted in the Q&A area.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed for that, Professor Middleton. That was incredibly educational. Nanorobots is something that sounds absolutely amazing. And I'm really excited to see what happens with those. One question that has come through actually is about, you talk a lot about exercise in the talk today, and how the importance of exercise. But also some people, when they start exercising, it could be painful. They could sort of be worried about their heart or something else. How can you sort of be checked out to check that it is appropriate for you to be going for exercise like that?
Okay, well, there's one very good way. You can actually see your GP, and you can be referred on the NHS with a prescription for exercise. So you can be referred to the Littledown Centre, and the Littledown Centre, they'll do a health check for you before you start, and they'll arrange appropriate exercise classes. But this is routine for the chain programme, but also for the Heart Club, the Cancer Club, the Stroke Club as well. There's a very simple formula which just involves a few questions and a few tests to make sure you're fit. But the vast majority of people can do moderate low impact exercise at no risk. So high risk things are high impact things: running, jumping, heavy lifting, heavy manual work. But walking with Nordic walking poles, a static bike, swimming, yoga, Pilates, these are all things that anyone can do at virtually no activity and at any age. So I would give my mother as an example. About 10 years ago, she phoned me up and told me she had booked herself in for a hip replacement. And I was absolutely gobsmacked. And she said, oh, well, I was on holiday and I developed hip pain, and I saw my GP and he diagnosed arthritis and is referring me to an orthopaedic consultant, and I'm booking him for a hip replacement. And I said, oh, well, just hang on a moment. I wonder if you'd see, one of my team about doing an exercise program. And 10 years ago, she started doing that. She's just had a 91st birthday. She bought a £70 static bike from Amazon, and she does a kilometre in the morning, and then she's got a walking frame and does a mile around the cricket pitch in the afternoon. And she's 91 and she hasn't complained of hip pain since. So it really doesn't matter your age and what your diagnosis is. Gentle exercise is perfectly safe. If you wanted to do weights and things like that, they can be useful, but a good personal trainer will go through things. But the easiest way is to contact your GP surgery and ask, can I be referred to Littledown Centre or other centres with a prescription to exercise, and they'll check you out.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. We've got a very good question online. If chain works for hips, is there a similar regime for shoulders or other joints?
It's a very very good point, and the answer is that we're developing those at the moment. So for knees, we have a knee class as well, and I'm working with my colleagues both in and out of the hospital for shoulders and things as well. So as I said, there should be some big announcements later in the year, and what our aim is for all those different joints to provide something similar to chain. So the basis will probably be the same, but the type of exercise you do will be slightly different. But all the evidence is that this type of exercise will work as well for other joints as it does for hips.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. And there's another question actually that's come in. Would you recommend steady cycling or varied, such as interval sprints, high resistance, etc.? I know obviously you went up a very steep hill when you were doing your Tour de France, but would you recommend that?
Okay, well, the simple, I'll give you some very, very simple tips. So you can do it on a static bike or a normal road bike. The key thing's remaining in the saddle, because you want the saddle to take the weight rather than have the force for the joints. You want to pedal a low gear, so it's how many times you turn the pedals, not how much force you put through. So putting a lot of force through the pedal and doing less turns is less good, but also can be painful. And if you've got clip-on pedals or pedals with baskets, that's useful because you want to push down, which you normally do, and that gives you the extension, but you want to pull up to give the flexion. And the key thing is doing 30 minutes each day. The thing about exercise, it is very, very effective, but it has a short half-life, and that means it wears off after about a day. So doing 30 minutes every day is better than doing an hour 3 times a day. So it's getting the dose right, and 30 minutes seems to be the minimum. So it's like with a headache. If you've got a headache, if you take paracetamol 1 gram or 1,000 milligrams, you get rid of the headache. If you took 1 milligram, you wouldn't expect it to make any difference. And that's the same. So if you just do a little bit, you don't get much benefit. As you get better, once your pain goes, then you can do more of that high thing. And for younger, fitter patients, then joining a spin class or doing an online session thing can be very useful. But the basic thing that gives you most is doing 30 minutes, remain in the saddle, spin a low gear, and try and have clip-on pedals so you can pull up as well as push down. If you do that, and that's what we teach in our classes, there's a 70% chance that you can get rid of the pain and stiffness or improve it significantly.
Brilliant, thank you for that. And we've had a couple of questions sort of more focused on walking. Somebody's asked, I'm in my mid-80s, controlling hip and knee pain with Voltarol and walking 3+ miles a day. What else can I do? And there's another question, is walking as suitable as cycling for exercise? I wonder if you could sort of address walking. Okay,
so walking's excellent. I think cycling is better, but some people either don't have a bike, don't wish to cycle. Static bike is good, but I would say walking is a good alternative. There are a couple of things that you can do to improve it. So one is shoe wear. So having a good pair of trainers makes a big difference because they've got some shock absorbance in them, and that can reduce the pain in your hip or your knee by about 15%. And one good and trainers vary a huge amount, and you're best getting them from a specialist shop and trying them on. So I go to a shop called Running Free, which is in Ashley Cross, and you can actually take the pairs of shoes off the shelf and you can try them on a treadmill, and it's amazing how different the shoes feel. And if you ask the assistants and say that I want a pair with good shock absorbance in, it really makes. And when you get the new pair of shoes, it's like walking on the moon or walking on air. And ideally, you want to have 2 pairs of trainers and change them each day, because it takes more than 24 hours for the foam to fully come back and do the shock absorbance. So if you're counsel perfection, 2 pairs of good trainers you've tried in the shop and just rotate them each day. The other thing is that you can use a stick. Your stick or a cane in the opposite hand to the joint is good, but better a Nordic walking pole. So they're the ones that look like ski poles. And if you use Nordic walking poles, they reduce the load through your hip and knee, especially going downhill, by about 60%. So you should be able to walk twice as far for the same, discomfort. They also give you an upper body workout, and so you use about 25% more energy. That's good for your heart. It releases endorphins, so it gives you that bit of a high, and also it helps with weight loss. So walking's good. Good pair of shoes with shock absorbing insoles or trainers, and use a pair of Nordic walking poles. We don't do a lot of Nordic walking in this country. It's very popular on the continent. Most people who do it have no problem with their hips, but it just reduces the load through it. And if you speak to the ultra marathon runners, they actually use Nordic walking poles because it helps them and they're faster walking. So those are my 2 tips. But no, I encourage walking. Running, jumping, heavy lifting, heavy manual work, that can make your symptoms worse, but walking is good.
Brilliant, thank you for that. Another question's come in. This is somebody who obviously realises they may have to come in for surgery. And the question is, will I need to have had 2 COVID vaccines before surgery?
My advice, if it was my family, my mother, my wife, my child, I would say yes. What we know at the moment is that COVID, all the variants of COVID, you're protected from if you've had 2 vaccines. Okay, so unless it's an emergency, you really want to think about delaying things till you've had the 2nd vaccine. So I personally, I would have an emergency operation, but I would not personally not have an elective operation because until I've had the 2nd vaccine. Because the risk is, and I'll take hip replacement, if you have a hip replacement and you get COVID while you're in hospital or the week afterwards, there's evidence that up to 1 in 3 people could die. So the risk is absolutely through the roof. Where we know that if you have 2 COVID vaccines, there's virtually no chance of you getting COVID or being unwell with it. So we've got a very highly effective treatment. Now, the maximum time between vaccinations is about 3 months, but I think the government is lowering it for various age groups. So at the very worst case scenario, you'd be delaying your operation for up to 3 months, but likely a few weeks. But the protection that it gives you is incredible. And it's not just for you. Can you imagine how you'd feel if you came into hospital with COVID and you survived, but you gave it to the person in the next bed? You know, how would you feel about that? So all I can say is what I would say personally. I would say get the vaccine, get 2 vaccines, whatever you're doing in life. And I think if you do that, then it's very safe. I think all our staff in the hospital now have had 2 vaccines unless there's a medical reason. And we do test all the patients coming in for surgery for that. So I think we're really safe, but I would encourage everyone to get that vaccine. You can, if say I was waiting for an operation, I had the 1st vaccine, but my next vaccine's not due for another 6 weeks, you can have the 2nd one after 6 weeks, and you can either just tell your GP surgery, look, I'm having an operation, can you bring it forward to 6 weeks, and they'll do it. Or if you ask your surgeon, I would just give you a letter to take to the vaccination centre saying there are medical reasons why this patient needs their 2nd vaccine early at 6 weeks rather than waiting the 3 months, and they're happy to do that, and that's been agreed. So I think if you are waiting for an operation, I would say speak to your GP or your surgeon and say, can you recommend me to have the vaccine at 6 weeks rather than 3 months? And I think that's the best solution. And if you do that, then I think virtually no one is waiting. And that's particularly for anyone who's high risk. So if you're over 50, you're high risk. If you're overweight, you're high risk. If you've got any chronic disease such as lung disease, COPD, if you're on any immunosuppressive or had cancer or on steroids or so. So for that group of people, I would say definitely don't think about an operation. But for anyone, just ask your GP or your surgeon whether they can help you get the second vaccine early, which I think is completely reasonable.
Brilliant, thank you for that. Another question's come in online. It's a double question, actually, it's 2 in 1. I find there is a fine line between walking enough and too much. Is it similar for bikes? And added to that, are the machines in the gym, such as stair climbers and skiing, as good as Nordic walking?
I think I'd say general principles. In general, being outside and doing exercise is probably better than doing it inside, because there are a lot of other advantages of being outside. Just being in the fresh air, being in the sunlight helps with vitamin D. We're very lucky. The best thing you can do is exercise near water. There are many studies showing that psychologically, well-being and things, people who exercise by water. So walking along the seafront, jogging along the beaches, going on boats and things, cycling along there is absolutely brilliant. I would say it's easier to do more cycling than walking, because your weight is held by the saddle. So if you weigh, say, 10 stone and you walk, every step you take, you're putting about 4 times your body weight through your hip and knee. So that's about 40 stone. Where if you're cycling, your weight is held by the saddle and you're just putting a few pounds through the joint. So often someone who, say, could walk half a mile and then it's too uncomfortable, could probably cycle for hours without any pain. In terms of the machines in the gym, they can be very good. And what I say is try those. The good thing about those machines is that you're static. Although you tend to be standing, you're static, so you're not putting several times your body weight through. So I would say give it a go. If you're comfortable and do it, then carry on with it. If you find it aggravates your symptoms, try something else. Other things, yoga and Pilates are particularly popular and are very good. You can do online classes and in-person classes, but the coaches for those are very good, and they're used to treating people with health problems, particularly musculoskeletal problems, because they tend to be older people that do them. So I've had very good reports from patients there. But essentially, you can do whatever you're comfortable. I mean, things like, obviously powerlifting and things wouldn't be the ideal thing, but appropriate light weights and things. If you go to the Heart Club at the Royal Bournemouth Hospital, people who've just had heart attacks and stents in are going around doing a circuit with weights and things on there. But they're relatively light weights, but there's no reason why you can't do that. There is this thing about you need a little bit of pain to gain. So I went on holiday to Scotland a couple of weeks ago, didn't do any exercise, and then when I got back to sort of cycling and going to the gym, for the first week I was a bit stiff and achy and things, and then once I got through that, I was sort of pain-free again. So don't let the first week or two put you off. Don't go and walk 10 miles or cycle 100 miles. Gradually build it up. Expect that you're going to get some muscle stiffness and pain. It's called DOMS, delayed onset muscle stiffness and pain. But after a week or two, it passes, and then you carry on. And what some people do, they do 1 or 2 bits of exercise. They're more stiff and painful. They give up, try it again, and the same happens. But if you stick at it, you'll find it goes off. And we find with the 6-week course, if you do that, it's a problem the first week or two, it disappears, and then people really get into it and start getting better as the weeks go by.
Thank you for that. And we're nearing the end of our hour with Professor Middleton. Another interesting comments come in. Swimming was my main exercise. I'm reluctant to go swimming to the swimming pool because of COVID. Do you have any sort of comments about swimming pools and their health and COVID?
I think hopefully in a month's time, all social restrictions will be removed. I think in general, the swimming pools are very safe because they're run by the councils and they stick to the letter of the law. The COVID is spread in the air. it's virtually impossible to get it from surfaces and water and things like that. Even scientists, if you swab rooms that had COVID in, it's almost impossible to grow it. The sensible thing is obviously keeping surfaces clean and washing your hands, but it's spread by the air. But I say we're in a unique position in that we've got the sea, and I went swimming at the weekend. I'm not as brave as my wife. She swam nearly every day over the winter, and if you go down onto the seafront early in the morning, there are large groups of people who've taken up sea swimming over the course of COVID and are having an absolute brilliant time. And I can say the sea has warmed up. We've got lovely sandy beaches and things. And I mean, you just couldn't go wrong. If you went tonight and you went down to one of the beaches and you just, even if you had a dip rather than a swim, I mean, the things that would do for your, mental health, your well-being and everything, couldn't be better. So I would say there are very few people in this country that have the luxury of a sandy beach not far from their home, and I would say make the most of it. But I would say I personally wouldn't have any doubts about going to a swimming pool, and certainly in a month's time I would go back. Things like aqua aerobics, there are classes at the Littledown and things, and it's brilliant. I've used hydrotherapy for my post-operative patients, and I've put some of the very seriously cases in a hydrotherapy pool 48 hours after surgery, and the patients are always amazed that it's a sort of weightless feeling, as though you're in space and you can do things in the water that you could never do on land. So it is very popular, but I think the risks of coronavirus are very negligible in swimming pools, and I think if you had both vaccines, it's negligible that you'll pick it up. So and I hope everyone will have the confidence in a month's time, once social restrictions is to get back to normal exercise. I think the chances of you coming to harm from getting coronavirus from there are almost zero, but the benefits from going swimming and going to swimming pools are massive.
Brilliant, thank you for that, Professor Middleton. Before we all rush off to the beach for our swim, a quick question on diet, which I think is really interesting, because we've been talking a lot about exercise, and obviously this isn't about diet, about smoking, drinking, that sort of diet. I understand that avoiding the nightshade plants helps. Potatoes, tomatoes, peppers. Is there any evidence to this, Professor Middleton, that you know of?
If you look at all the evidence of diet and arthritis, there's no good evidence that any particular foodstuff aggravates arthritis or improves it. But I think what is true is that certain people have certain tolerances and things to foods and foodstuffs. And so I think anecdotally, if you find certain foods or things aggravate your symptoms, avoid them. If you find others that help them. The main thing is eating healthily, and essentially if it comes in a packet with a list of ingredients, it's less likely to be healthy than something that doesn't. So it's better to buy raw fruit and veg that you eat raw or you cook yourself. So it's those sort of Mediterranean lean meat, pulses, fresh fruit and veg, and food you prepare yourselves. And one of the things I enjoyed during lockdown was that my children, who are in their 20s, sort of came home because they were working from home, and that we ate as a family every day, and each of us took turns in cooking the food from raw ingredients. And I think that's the key thing. And avoid things in packets with lots of preservatives and labels on. If you've got time, make your cakes, eat raw food and things like that. But no, there isn't any particular diet or supplement that is shown to help most people. Eat the food that you enjoy and try and do it healthily.
Brilliant, thank you for that. That's fascinating. I'm now going to draw this to the conclusion, because we hope to show a quick video to you at the end about some of the plans we have for the future as University Hospitals Dorset about coping with patients, etc., and our outpatient the large numbers of waiting lists. But before I thank Professor Middleton, is there anything you'd like to say just to close off?
Well, just to thank everyone for attending this evening. I hope it's just opened people's eyes and just think how all of us, whether we're on a waiting list for an operation or whether we're a relative or friend of someone, how we can all help each other to change our lives and be healthier. And we're fortunate living in a beautiful part of the world. It's a beautiful summer's day, and the more of us that could get out this evening and go for a walk or a swim or something like that, I think the happier that everyone can be. So I would encourage everyone after they've listened to the video is maybe everyone to go out for a walk or a swim or a cycle or to chat with someone. And I think if we could all do that, then tonight's been a success.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for that, Professor Middleton. And on behalf of everyone who's been viewing this and taking part, thank you from them as well. The video we're going to show, this was actually our Chief Executive, Debbie Fleming, who was on BBC South Today last night, talking about our plans for doing outpatient clinics in a slightly different way than you're used to. So this is a bit of a sort of a show of ankle of what we're planning for the rest of the year. But just to say thank you all very much for attending. We will be sharing a recording of this event, and we will be putting that in our members newsletter. If you're not a member of the Trust, I do recommend that you do become one, because we'll keep you in touch regularly with news and features from the Trust. But thank you all again, and here is the video, I hope.
Well, hospitals across the south have been working to develop innovative ways to cut waiting lists. In Dorset, teams are planning to use part of a shopping centre as a Nightingale-style medical site to process large numbers of patients with simple issues. Earlier, I spoke to Debbie Fleming, Chief Executive of the Poole, Royal Bournemouth and Christchurch hospitals, and I asked her to explain exactly what they were going to do.
So we're really excited about the opportunity to do things really differently by having a large amount of space, building on all our learning from the mass vaccines and the Nightingale centres. We can lay things out in a way that allows us to be really efficient, see patients really well and give a good patient experience, but really crack through those numbers by using space differently.
What are the benefits then of using a shopping centre rather than trying to see these patients in hospital?
So at the moment, all of our space has been designed in the traditional way within the hospital. The outpatient clinic looks the way it probably looked for the last 20 odd years. Coming out of COVID, we were really worried about the large numbers of patients waiting, some of them for a very long time, and we don't want to be adding to those waiting lists. By setting up the space completely afresh within the shopping centre area, we can design it so that every clinician is used to best effect. We have consistent pathways. We can use different people at different points, including volunteers, to make sure that we really get through the numbers, do what we have to do at that point in time, but see far more patients than we would normally see in a traditional hospital setting.
Presumably you've got to move staff to the new setting. So how does that speed things up rather than slow things down?
So if we look at our staff, fundamentally, we can only do this because our staff are so excited about it, and our clinicians are really, really keen to come into this place, which is going to be our hotbed and our test bed for innovation. So we've talked to staff who at the moment are facing limitations. The social distancing means that we can't do things the way we normally would do, so numbers would be lower. But by coming out of the clinic, not only can we get the numbers back up, but we can see even greater numbers with the same number of staff, or perhaps with a few additional staff of different background or skill set. We can do many more people through one session than if they were in the hospital setting.
If you're trying to speed things up, is there a danger that certain things might be missed?
So things that patients can do for themselves without having to speak to a member of staff, without having to come in. We want them to do everything we can remotely. We want to empower people so they're in charge more of their own pathway and care. But by having things consistent, by doing things in the same way, wherever they go along that lane, we know there's less chance of error and we can actually do things better for patients. But I would say as well, we want to make it a good experience. It's not just about getting the numbers through.
Debbie Fleming, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Jo.